and operating procedures. I'm going to let you know, you probably got that notice. This is being recorded. I'll tell you in a moment where to find that recording. So my name is Dorothy Plaza, and I'm the Idaho DTTAC Master Trainer Select. And I would really like this to be an informal discussion, so please feel free to ask questions as we go along. You're welcome to use that chat box, or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask questions, that would be great too. I've got Ashley on board here. She's going to help me pay attention to that chat box so I don't miss any questions. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the Diabetes Alliance of Idaho website at diabetesallianceofidaho.org. So, what is the Diabetes Prevention and Recognition Program, or DPRP? You're probably already familiar with it, but it is the CDC DPRP serves to provide for organizations who are delivering the National Diabetes Prevention Program. It provides eligibility criteria for the DPP programs. It guides for program structure, content, and goals. It provides a registry of those programs on the CDC website, and it does data monitoring to ensure the program is achieving its intended outcomes. Mostly that's what we're going to be discussing today, are some of those changes within those procedure guidelines. So as of May 1st, 2021, the new 2021 DPRP standards became effective. And the new submission portal was released the first week of June in 2021. With the new DPRP standards, organizations will have 6 months to make internal system changes to really fully implement those 2021 standards. So until that time, you're going to be able to convert your 2018 format file to the 2021 format within that DPRP portal. If you have not converted it, you can do it right there. All organizations will be able to start using that 2021. We were able to start using that as of June. And all organizations must start using that new 2021 format as of December 21st of 2021. So you can, to summarize, you can use your 2018, go into the portal, it will convert it. There's a process and a step-by-step process, very, very detailed there for you. Or you can convert it to the 2021 and go ahead and import it that way. But by December 1st, you will have to have the new format. So we're going to discuss the updates to the 2021 Standards and Operating Procedure that was effective in May. And this webinar is really going to provide an overview of the revisions between the 2018 and the 2021 standards, but really for a full understanding of all the requirements that need to be met for CDC recognition, I'm going to refer you to those DPRP standards that are found at the National Diabetes Prevention Program Customer Service Center. You can find that at nationaldppcsc.cdc.gov. That's going to give you the full multi-page new standards. So to start this overview, participant eligibility has not changed from the 2018 standards, and it remains the same. And you're probably already familiar with those eligibility standards. That participants have to be 18 years of age and older. Participants need to have a body mass index of 25 or greater, 23 or greater if Asian American. All the program participants must be considered eligible based on either a blood test, and that is that fasting glucose, a plasma glucose, or a hemoglobin A1C, or a gestational diabetes that you see on there, or a positive screening for prediabetes based on the prediabetes risk test that the CDC provides. None of that has changed. Just to point out, though, those of you who are Medicare suppliers, Medicare has some slightly different criteria. You're probably already familiar with that. That is that participants enrolled in the MDPP cannot self-report their blood tests. So you have to have a copy of that. and slightly different requirement on the fasting glucose. Rather than the 100 to 125, CMS requires 110 to 125 as their eligibility standards. And that just history of gestational diabetes, the CDC does allow a self-report on that. Medicare does not allow for it. So it's just, and then that screening, that CDC screening is not an option for Medicare participants. So we're probably pretty familiar with those slight differences that Medicare has for their eligibility requirements. But just to reiterate, nothing has changed in the eligibility requirements between the 2018 and the 2021. So the DPRP portal will require some additional organizational level information, such as contact information for your organization, delivery mode specific information, delivery location information, and a coach ID. This information needs to be updated or just confirmed in the month that you deliver your data submission, and the month that that data submission is due. I encourage you, the month that your data submission is due, go in early that month and update this information or validate the information before you even start the process of submitting your data. You may find that there's information there you don't have and you need to gather. And so you don't want to wait till it's the last minute and you're needing to submit the rest of the data. Once okay, so we're going to talk about some of the new requirements a little bit later, such as that coach ID. We'll talk about the requirements for that, but that coach ID is something that your organization creates, and it really should not contain any personal identifiable information. We'll give you a little bit more information on that as we get into that particular section. So new session level data includes additional gender options and a cohort ID. So previously, data collection on participants had each participant in their own timeline, regardless of which cohort they were in. Well, now organizations have the option of creating a cohort ID, and that helps to track participants within their particular cohorts. You still have the option of keeping your participants on an individual timeline, like in the past, by using a participant ID rather than a cohort ID. So you still have that option, but you may want to think about the future as you begin new reporting processes. Would it benefit you to have your data collection specific to cohorts, have your participants in those particular cohorts? The session ID has been removed from the reporting data. We're no longer including session ID. So some additional changes include the separation of that enroll variable you previously reported, and it's now 2 new variables. It's enroll MOT, which identifies the main motivation to the participant enrolling in your program. Choices such as healthcare provider, blood test results, family, friends, media advertisement, those are now all options for enrollment motivation. You'll need to collect this information from your participants at enrollment and include it in your data. So enroll HC, that other variable, asks how the participant was referred. There's choices such as, doctor, pharmacist, other healthcare provider, etc. The payer type has been changed to payer source and really just includes some additional options. Alrighty. So I'm just checking here. You guys are really nice and quiet, but honestly, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to ask them along the way. So there's this new addition of a coach ID. So the coach ID is going to be recorded in that CDS file that you submit to CDC. So there's a new column for coach ID. And this is an ID that's uniquely assigned and maintained by you, the organization, right? You don't want it to contain any personal identifiable information. If you are a MDPP supplier or your coach is part of an MDPP program, then you're going to want to use the coach's NPI number. That's what Medicare is looking for. Otherwise, you can create your own coach ID number. Each coach is going to need a coach ID number. Also, the coach module, there's a module in that DPRP portal. This is part of the information that you're going to be going in and updating or verifying, requires that you enter the coach training provider information. That's how your coaches were trained. When they give you options, were they trained by a national, private organization or national network? Was this a CDC recognized virtual organization? Was this done by a master trainer? Whoever holds that MOU that the CDC's recognized. So how is your coach trained? They're gathering that information also. So far, they're not gathering information on the 2 hours continuing advanced training, at least not in the portal. I do anticipate they're gonna add that at some point. They haven't said that, but they're gonna want to keep track of that additional 2 hours that coaches are now required.
Dorothy, do you know when they're gonna? You just said you don't know when they're gonna start tracking it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, I've not gotten any specific information on that yet. But as soon as I do, I will send that information out to all the coaches. I think it's important. We know it's upcoming, and we want to have our data collected on that.
Yeah, they at a national level, we've been talking about it with the extension as well, that nobody knows exactly when or what and what kind of trainings will, count, that kind of stuff.
Yes, they do have a list. The CDC has their list of organizations that have an MOU with them, and those are there are 12 of them. I think I have a slide here talking about there are 12 of them that are registered to offer this advanced training. So we do know which organizations yet. We just don't know how they're going to collect it.
Okay, great.
Great question. So some other changes in the data collection include the removal of that default value of 999 for physical activity when it wasn't collected. So as a coach, if you did not collect those physical activity minutes, you just put 999 as a default. Or if you haven't been collecting it because you're going through each module and you haven't assigned that yet as collection, you would use that default 999. Now you report 0 if there's no physical activity minutes collected at that session. So they're going to assume that that participant had 0 activity minutes. So another important thing is to really collect those physical activity minutes. We can ask our participants, what's your average minutes of physical activity you think you did in the last week? So having those numbers are going to be really important. And we'll see in a moment how that applies to some new ways of recognizing our programs or keeping our recognition. So new in the 2021 standards include the option of collecting that pre and post program A1C measurements. So that's an option. If you choose to collect this information, it could be used to support your participant outcomes toward completers. I'm going to explain how that works a few slides later. If you do collect the data, the pre-program A1C must be taken within a year of entering the program, which is, if we're collecting that anyways for eligibility, we've had that 12-month mark to do that. But it must be submitted or reported by the participant within 14 days of the first session. So we really have to have that data by 14 days of that first session. The value must be in that pre-diabetes range of 5.7 to 6.4. It can be self-reported and can only be used for future submissions. So you can't go back and add those values to your past submission. So if you have a participant on a past submission, you can't start collecting that A1C for them officially using that data. So it has to be on new participants coming up. So there are a few changes to the recognition process. Now organizations may remain in that pending status indefinitely as long as you're submitting all the required data. Previously, you could only remain in pending for 36 months before losing that status. So that pending, if you remember, you've applied for a recognition, you go through the application process, they've accepted all your data or your information, and they've sent you an organization code and a start date. You're in that pending status. Now you can remain there indefinitely as long as you're continuing to submit all the required data. But while you're in that pending status, organizations can move to preliminary or move right to full if you meet those requirements during the data evaluation. Remember, that's our every 6 months we submit our data and we get an evaluation report from DPRP. So to move from the preliminary status, you have to, or move into that preliminary status, you've got to continue to meet the pending requirements, in addition to having at least 5 participants that are considered completers. So the definition of a completer is an eligible participant who attended at least 8 sessions in months 1 through 6, and whose time from the very first session held by that cohort to the last session attended by the participant is at least 9 months. So you have to have at least 9 months of that data for the participant, for them to be considered a completer. Organizations can also stay in preliminary or full recognition indefinitely. Again, you're not going to be bumped out as long as you continue to make all the required data submissions and re-achieve that preliminary or re-achieve that full recognition at least every 3 years. Again, you need to have at least those 5 completers within the cohorts being evaluated in order to stay in that. So after meeting the requirements for pending and preliminary, an organization may obtain full recognition by meeting an additional 2 requirements, requirement 6 and requirement 7. And there's now 3 ways to meet requirement 6. You can either have at least a 5% weight loss average of your eligible participants. This is what we've had in the past, or at least a 4% weight loss average and 150-minute a week physical activity average. This is where keeping track of those physical activity minutes is really going to be helpful. Or you can have show at least a 0.2% A1C reduction. This is where that optional A1C data collection can really help your organization maintain and obtain that full recognition. So in addition to meeting requirement 6, what I just mentioned, you must meet requirement 7 and show that at least 35% of your completers are eligible based on that blood test or history of gestational diabetes. So this is new. This gives us 3 different ways to maintain our recognition status and some nice variables in there. We're not just locked into that 5% average weight loss overall of our eligible participants. That A1C data collection could be really helpful in the future. I'm excited about that one. I hope you guys are too. I really think that A1C data collection is also something that we as programs can use that show the success of our programs, that show the progress of our participants. So there is an option of obtaining an additional 2 full years of recognition. Generally, we've had that 3-year recognition benchmark. And now you can get an additional 2 full years by having some retention statistics. So by having a minimum of 50% retention of your participants, these are your eligible participants, at the beginning of the 4th month, a minimum of 40% retention at the beginning of the 7th month, and a minimum of 30% retention at the beginning of the 10th month. So they're looking at retention as being, again, something to add 2 more years of full recognition. So they're recognizing the value of this retention in our participants. So there are changes. There's no new changes to the original training for lifestyle coaches. That remains the same, but changes to the ongoing training. So after coaches have received their initial formal training to become a lifestyle coach, coaches are required to obtain that additional 2 hours each year of that advanced coach training. This is training beyond the initial training, and it must be provided by training entities listed on the National DPP Customer Service Center. That's where you're going to find that list of the 12 different entities that are offering advanced lifestyle coach training. Again, the question came up, when do we submit that information, or we don't know yet, but it'll either be something that they're going to ask us just to keep, and if we're audited, we would have it available, or probably something they're going to put on the portal in the future.
And Dorothy, we had a question come in a couple slides back. For the 0.2% A1C reduction, is that on average or by the individual?
That is a great question. So that's going to be on average. So again, all of these are averages among your eligible participants. And you need to have a minimum of 5. So let's say you just had 5, right? Eligible participants. You would either need to meet that 5% weight loss averaged, that 4% weight loss average, plus the average of 150 minutes physical activity, or the average of a 0.2. Yeah, A1C. Great question.
And there's one more question that came in. Bridget, you might have to explain, but she talks about, do you know if any of the providers are charging for the training?
They are. Most of them are. There was a webinar I was on not too long ago that gave an opportunity for several of these organizations to present what they were going to offer in terms of advanced coach training. And so the question came up, is anybody going to offer this for free? None of those who are on the MOU are offering it for free. But the CDC did say they were really taking that into consideration. And I'm hoping that they'll come up with a free option for that training. Yeah.
I know that was a big discussion of concern amongst the providers, extension university providers. And we talked about maybe trying to do an MOU to provide ongoing training so that we could provide it at no cost or very low cost, just because many people who are providing it are not, they're not making money on the program, they're barely able to sustain the program, if not having a loss at the program. So
absolutely. I will say that the CDC did say they are not taking any more MOU applications at this point in time. Whether they will open that up in the future, I don't know. But I do know that that was, again, a big part of that discussion. And these organizations, later I noticed that DTTAC came out and they reduced their fee for their advanced coach trainings. And so I'm hoping others may either consider at least reducing it or starting to consider offering something for free.
Do you know what they were charging? What about?
Previously, DTTAC was charging $50 and it went down to $40. So still significant if you have a number of coaches that need those hours. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really even though these standards are out and official, right, it still raises a lot of questions and opportunity, I think, for some additional change, like offering these things for free. So hopefully the customer service center will come in and be able to do that for us. Great questions. So just a little bit more. So the DPRP portal has been revised to include organizational level information that requires you to confirm or update that in the month of your data submission. This is the portal where you submit your data. It's also where you're going to get your error reports, evaluation reports, recognition documents. It's really changed. So if you've not had a cycle yet of reporting through this SAMS system, it's really improved. In the past, you would submit your data, you might get an email back, there's an error, please check this. You're going back and forth between the spreadsheet that you submitted and then finally you get an evaluation report, and anyways, it's just much more cumbersome process. Here, it's all right there. A couple of things to think about, though. When you do submit the data, you're uploading your files. It immediately assesses for any errors that they notice, gives you opportunities right then to make corrections. and then you have to submit it. So uploading it is not the same thing as submitting it. So I made that mistake the very first time I did that. I uploaded everything. I made all my corrections. I thought I hit a save type button, and nope, they never got it. So I got an email saying, you haven't submitted this, what's going on? Realized I had to go through the whole process of actually submitting after I had made all these changes. There's a great webinar that the CDC has on how to do your submissions, and it talks about walking through that new portal, all the buttons and things you need to do. It's really nice that it's all right there in one spot though, and you really see that you've addressed any type of error or potential error before you're even submitting the information. So again, until December, you can use your original 2018 spreadsheet version, and the site will then convert it to a 2021. But after December, you have to submit your data in that 2021 spreadsheet version. The data submission templates are available at the National Diabetes Prevention Program's Customer Service Center. So they've got everything is there. It's really a one-stop shop with that. Also, I really think it's important. These are big changes, and you know, it feels complicated. It feels more complicated than it was before, rather than less complicated. But I think they are working to simplify some of this process. So I start out with, don't worry. Really, honestly, the CDC it's there to help you. I've had great customer service with them over the years. I get very quick replies. Usually I understand it. If I don't understand it, I go back and they explain it again in different ways. And so they are really there to help you. You can ask your questions about data at the DPRP data at cdc.gov. But if you have other questions not related to your data submissions, even questions about the new portal and how it works, that customer service DPP, it's national DPP, csc.cdc.gov. They have a place where you can ask your questions there. It's a great opportunity to do that. Pretty simple process to do. They have webinars posted there for all of the new transitions, the data transitions. They have a frequently asked questions on there too, where you can find help. So there's a lot of really good resources. If you don't find what you're looking for, or you're not sure where to go, you can always reach out to me. I'm here for you too. That's what I do as the master trainer here. So feel free to reach out if you have questions, need assistance in finding those answers. So I'm kind of closing things out here. I hope that wasn't too fast and furious, but I want to leave some time for maybe questions that you have, comments. Also, if you have done your data submission, how did that go? Were there any challenges to doing it that you experienced? Have you gone in yet and updated? Are you in the month of submission and you've gone in and either updated your information or played around with the portal at all? You don't have to wait till the month you do it. You can go in now, you can update it. You just have to confirm it during that month too, if you want to get in early and kind of look and see what the information is like. So what questions do you have?
So I have now done it twice. I did it in June, and then I just did it this week. I have I have two different, I have full recognition for our face-to-face, and I have pending for our distance learning, because we just submitted this last year. So two different reporting dates, even though I tried to get them to streamline those, but no, they won't do that. They won't make anything easy, is my opinion. I'm sure they don't do it on purpose, but it sure feels like that sometimes.
Yeah.
So when I first went to do it, I thought, okay, I'm just going to use the 2018, convert it.
Mm-hmm.
No. It was much easier, in my opinion, for me to just take my data and add the new categories for the 2021, because you're basically going to have to do that anyway. When you try, was that your experience? I mean, that was mine.
I converted. Yeah.
You did. You used the conversion tool, and then
I did it myself. I'm in the boat. I did it myself. Yes.
So you uploaded it in the 2021 format. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what I did. But first, I went to do their conversion tool, And I thought, well, that's even harder than, so I just took my data set and added the new categories and took out the old categories and put in the, whatever they said to put in if you hadn't collected that measure and
Okay.
uploaded. I still have trouble, like just now I was like, oh yeah, I still put 999. So I'm going to have to go back.
It's those old habits. We've
They're
got
going to send it back to me and I'm going to have to put in 0. But the other thing, the other error that I got that I thought was really interesting is it said the cohort ID
Mhm.
does not match a previous. Well, I've never submitted a cohort ID for this group because I've never submitted them under the new standards. So I thought, well, that's an interesting error or quality check because I've never submitted this. I've submitted data for this group, but under the old standards. And then now I had to submit it under the new standard. So I'm sure they're going to answer that. But I just wondered if you have had any weird errors like that or quality checks.
Here's my thought on that. You were submitting data for participants who you have submitted data for in the past, correct? Not brand new. So in the past, correct? Yeah, okay. So in the past, you used a participant ID. They don't recommend switching to cohort ID for the same person. If you used a participant ID in the past and you've got that person still coming through the data process, you want to keep the participant ID, not create a new cohort ID. Okay.
Well, there's two. There's a participant ID and a cohort ID, right? Isn't there?
So you can use the participant ID for the cohort ID.
Oh, so you're supposed to use both. Okay. I just gave it a cohort ID and I keep using the same participant ID. So that's what that error is.
That's what it is. You went midstream with somebody who originally had just a participant ID, no cohort ID, and then you put them in a cohort to be tracked in a cohort where really they've been tracked individually by that participant ID. They need to stay with that participant ID through the process. If you have a new group, a new person coming on, a new cohort that's never been submitted for before, you can start that cohort ID.
Okay. So you have to include the new data code cohort ID, but you just you put participant ID in both categories.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's the first time I ran across that. It didn't do it on my other data set that I submitted in June, but
yeah,
I think they were all new participants either. So I find that interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll see what I'm sure they're going to send it back to me. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keep me informed. I'd love to know about any of these, challenges that people come up with, because you're not going to be the only one who has that. And it'll be helpful if I get that question from someone else. I can help put all the pieces together.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting. Yep. But it's not, I like the portal. I like it better because you can do you can correct your own data and you don't have to go back and forth with them. So.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things I found really helpful, to have everything right there. You see it all in real time. You make those corrections in real time. You're not waiting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hopefully it'll become easier and easier, and we won't forget about those 999s.
Yeah, we don't. So basically you don't use 999 anymore. You put 0, which makes more sense to me because it is 0. But.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Any other questions, any comments? Anybody else have experiences with submitting or questions prior to submitting?
Dorothy, it's Nancy. And I don't have questions about submitting necessarily, but I do have a couple questions I jotted down when you were talking. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm wondering if if we can have people in the class that we are not reporting to CDC or Medicare, maybe because they already have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and they're coming with their spouse or something like that. Is that allowed?
That's a great question. And it is allowed because you're not including them in the CDC data. So they're really not part of the tracking. They're not really part of the national program in that sense, technically. Sometimes people will have their spouses join them and their spouses don't qualify, or significant others or family members, or like you said, someone with type 2 diabetes who no longer qualifies. But those of us who run these diabetes prevention programs. We know the value of the information there, and the lifestyle change can be so important for somebody with type 2 diabetes, as long as, my opinion is, as long as this is not replacing diabetes education for someone who is diagnosed with type 2. So in terms of what the CDC recognizes, it doesn't matter to them, as long as you're only reporting those people who are eligible.
Okay.
And we do the same thing, Nancy. We made that determination several years ago, and we also know from best practices that if their spouse or their partner or the people that are living with them attend the class as well, that behavior change seems to be so much more, it just happens better. We know this with a workout buddy or a family member or someone, they live in the same household. So we've actually had an adult and a teenager attend. The teenager was not, officially part of the NDPP, but they came with the parent. And some of the adults that have come with their spouse, we do track their data for our purposes, but we don't submit it to the CDC. So it's just one of those things. We're not going to tell people, no, you can't come to this program that's going to help you make a healthy lifestyle change. But unfortunately, the CDC program, we don't submit them to the CDC. So we do have them still fill out a form, an enrollment, and a consent form, because we have to have that. But we don't include their data. Or if you do include it, my experience, if you do include it, because sometimes I have multiple coaches' data and they give me data, they'll come back and say, this person is not qualified for the program. Is that correct? And I'll say, yep. And then they just don't count the data. So.
Okay.
I don't think it counts against you. They don't count it against you. They just don't include that person in the process to get recognized.
That is correct. Yeah, it doesn't count against you if you accidentally put them on there. They will just exclude it. Mm-hmm.
I'm also wondering, it seems like there's just a few CMS versus CDC requirements. I'm wondering if you could just jot those down, if it's just like 2 or 3, or if it's more than that, if it's possible to get a document, maybe the DAI can post it that defines those pretty easily.
Yeah, and you can find them in the CDC standards. When you look at the 2021 standards and you go to eligibility, they clearly say this is CDC and this is CMS. So it's right on there. That's a good spot. It's just a 1-pager right there that you can pull out. But I think it's a really great idea for me to separate that out and go ahead and post it so that you can see what those differences are. I'm happy. I'll put that on the DAI website. Absolutely.
Great. And can I keep going? I have a couple more. So I'm wondering why they don't ask us when a person drops, why they dropped. So I don't know if you're in dialogue with them, but for me, it's valuable information and I'd like it to be recorded somewhere. If they're going to do any studies or looking back, I think it's very relevant and there's no place to indicate. So. Great
question. Why dropped? It is not data the CDC is collecting right now. I am on a series of interviews with CMS though, with the MDPP program, and they do talk about that. But that's just CMS collecting that information. So why the CDC is not, that's a great question. Yep. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and then same with the physical activity one. I'm glad that it's not 999, but I think there's a difference between 0 and not collected. So that's frustrating for me, particularly when I have people that come in and they're already doing a lot of minutes, but we're not collecting it yet. So just to share that.
Yes. Now, Nancy, are you saying you're not collecting it yet because they have not been assigned the task of recording their minutes at that point in the curriculum, or because the coach didn't collect it?
Because at the beginning, they haven't been told to keep track. So if I ask them, they'll give me some number for sure. But because they haven't actually been recording it, we don't know how accurate that is.
Right.
So,
and hopefully that's not too far into the curriculum. I recognize that we have some flexibility with moving modules around a little bit. And it could be something if you feel like, yeah, that's a really good point, because it would be probably 4 sessions in.
right.
That's a great question for me to ask them, is even though how are their averages working out? If we put zeros in there, is that really counting against where there should be a number, or are they recognizing that at least 4 weeks in, you're not even collecting this data? I'll ask them that. And any questions that you guys ask that I then go ask CDC, I'll post that on the DAA website. So we have upcoming, we'll have that, I believe, up and running hopefully October 1st with our new version of the website. And so I have a message board on there. I have places to post resources and all that. So I'll continue, I'll add that, all these answers that I get to that section.
Great. And I have two more. One is the A1C. If they're not within the 5.7 to 6.4, do we indicate it? Because, for example, they might be 5.6 or they might be 6.5 on their most recent test, but they may qualify because they had gestational diabetes or something like that. So do we include it or should we leave it off if it's not in that range?
Great question. It's kind of two different things we're talking about here. Using the A1C as eligibility criteria really needs to be within the 5.7 to 6.4 is what they're looking for. But you can have somebody who qualifies with a fasting glucose or a 2-hour oral glucose or gestational diabetes or the CDC risk test, and they're eligible even though that A1C wasn't in that range. So you're going to go ahead and notate that person's eligibility based on that blood work, but they don't want to see a pre and post comparison for that A1C drop unless they start out in that 5.7 to 6.4 range. What they're looking for is people within the pre-diabetes range and what happens to them in their A1C.
Oh, that's interesting. I would think they would still want the data, but okay.
No, that A1C is being used to maintain your recognition status, not as an eligibility requirement. Remember, we talked about to maintain eligibility, you have to have a 5% average weight loss across your eligible, a 4% weight loss plus a 150-minute average, or that A1C reduction. That is on how to maintain your CDC recognition status, not eligibility for the participant coming in the program.
Right, but the whole reason we're collecting data is to show that what we're doing is making a difference in terms of increasing your risk of type 2 diabetes or moving you lower beyond the pre-diabetes even into the normal blood sugar range. So anyway, I hear you.
Yeah. Previously, we didn't do anything with the eligibility numbers. Oh, they're in pre-diabetes range based on A1C or glucose that made them eligible. We didn't do anything with those numbers to see where it changed. So now we are using them, but it's in that limited way.
And then my final one is you said that you need 5 completers to get recognition within a cohort. And I'm thinking that sometimes we're identifying them individually. So my understanding was it was within a time frame.
Yes.
So if it's specifically a cohort versus a time frame, seems like it would be beneficial to us to have people stay as participant individuals, not as a cohort, because then we could collect more over time to keep the 5.
Yeah. Let me clarify. If I said it was within cohort, I misspoke. It is within your data submission. Okay. So they're tracking that individual just like they have before from the beginning to the end. And that person needs to meet all that eligibility to be a completer, whether they're in cohort A, cohort B, cohort C, didn't matter. It's within the data submission.
Great.
So that remains the same. Yeah.
That's it. Thanks.
Great questions. Thank you for that. Are there other questions, other comments, other experiences? If there are not anymore, I just want to thank you all so much for being here, for considering looking over those changes from the 2018 to the 2021 standards, for asking your fantastic questions, for giving us your comments. That's so much about what this is for. It's just for you. And so everything that you provide is going to help another DPP program too. So thank you so much for that opportunity. Again, this has been recorded. It'll be available on the Diabetes Alliance of Idaho website, which is diabetesallianceofidaho.org. And again, I just want to thank you for being here and enjoy the rest of your day. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. On that last PowerPoint, you can reach me at dorothy.r.plaza@gmail.com or always at info@diabetesallianceofidaho.org. Again, thank you so much.